Welcome to another episode of our personal empowerment audio program, Finding Yourself in Paradise. Hi, I'm Michael Benner.
And I'm Steve Snyder, and our program today is entitled Conscience. Now, not conscious or consciousness, that's something very different, and if you're a listener to this program, you know a lot about that. But this is conscience. It's that part of you that tells you to behave well when nobody's looking, that little inner voice, that part of you that's your morals, your ethics, your social codes. Superego is one name that Freud called it. For me, my earliest experiences with it were when my little brother would do something wrong and my parents told me to tattle on him. And I had this little twinge, I shouldn't think on my little brother, wait a minute now, I'm not the parent here. I don't have to do their job for. And it felt wrong for me to now, not if he was going to do something dangerous or something, but when he was just disobeying like he's supposed to be asleep by now kind of thing. And then the second huge experience I had with conscience was when the Vietnam War came and the draft came, and it was can I actually go there? Conscientious objector, can I actually be one of those, or would I go to Canada, or how would I do? It was such a huge issue. People who are around 60 years old now remember very well. Conscience became a huge part of, can I go kill little people who didn't do anything bad to me, So that's what we're going to talk about, that little voice inside that knows what's right or wrong. Whether it's inborn or learned, it's powerful, and it's that part that's our moral compass, the thing we call conscience.
Yeah, conscience is very definitely related to consciousness. You said something very different, and it is that difference that we want to emphasize because, interestingly, many languages do not have a distinction between conscience and consciousness, as if conscience is a part of consciousness. Well, I think it is, and part of what we're going to talk about today is that it's the evolution of consciousness as not just being awake and sentient, but aware. In other words, a degree of understanding that helps us also to develop our conscience. To me, it's almost like conscience is one of the faculties of consciousness. And, in preparing for this program, Steve and I have been chatting about this, and there's not a lot of literature about conscience. I think a lot of people have a problem even spelling the word. I always think of C-O-N, science.
Yeah, it sort of seems weird, against con science, but it has nothing. It comes from a totally different word, which means a bunch of thought, basically.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, so we're going to talk about the fact that, as Steve said, in some ways, conscience is very different than consciousness, and yet, obviously, they have a relationship, and it's maybe coincidental almost.
Well, if you're unconscious, your conscience can't really speak to you. You have to be conscious at least, to hear the conscience.
But we hear, especially in Eastern philosophy and in pop psychology, developing your consciousness, expanding your awareness. And part of that is aspiring to be more sensitive to your conscience. So, I remember asking a teacher I had in a philosophy class about the concept of conscience, and I got sort of a blank look, well, not too many people have actually talked about that or written about that. I did a little Google research on it, and it turns out there are some references. Plato and Socrates, the old Greeks, talked about it, but it was only in the Middle Ages that people began to really think of it in the terms we think of it today. The inhibiting factor that prevents you from doing wrong or bad things, or some would say the motivating factor, sort of a double-edged sword here, that causes you to aspire to goodness or godness. Now, I think both things are true. I think it does inhibit our bad behavior. That little voice says, you shouldn't do that. Even as a child, you shouldn't be doing that. And you and I were talking about how we're hardwired to become stressed when we lie. There's no question about that.
It's pretty powerful. I mean, if you think about it, in the earliest evolution of humans, we were pretty much driven by the rules of the leader of the pack, or then the king or the owner or the pope or whoever it was that made the rules, and we followed the rules. And it was sort of this group conscience thing. The more humans have evolved, the more our individual conscience comes to fore, and how, like, my conscience isn't necessarily the same as your conscience. And as we get more sensitive, we pay attention to that inner voice inside of ourselves that says what's right for me. And that's, I think, the evolution of conscience in a way. It used to be pretty much the rules were made by others, and we followed them. That's how it is in the animal kingdom. You know, there's the queen bee that runs the show. Well, actually, all she does really is procreate, but they all revolve around her. And there's the leader of the pack in the canine community. I mean, the rules that communities follow, and there's very little need for introspection or reflection about, like, what's right for me or wrong for me when you're in a pack. But as human beings become more individual and evolve and become more awake, more aware, we become more tuned into our conscience and what feels right for us to do. You said we're hardwired to know that lying is bad, and that's so incredibly powerful when you stop to think about it. Now, if we don't know it's a lie, we wouldn't register it. Or if somehow we grew up in a society where we didn't know lying was bad, if lying was an accepted norm and it was perfectly okay to do, we wouldn't get stressed by it. So I don't think it's inborn that we know lying is bad, but once we learn that lying is, like, bad, from then on, every time we do it, we get this voice inside that not only speaks to us, sometimes in pictures, sometimes in words, sometimes in feelings, but always in sensations. Always there's this thing inside the gut that, clenches a little bit. Always there's this change in galvanic skin response. Always there's this blood pressure that rises a little bit. I mean, we change considerably. That's what lie detectors, polygraphs, many graphs measure. All these different physiological changes that take place when we lie because we're stressed. It's not that lying makes us do that. It's that stress makes us do that, but lying causes us to feel stressed.
Lying is stressful. In other words, we are born with, this part I would argue is inherent. Whether the cognitive aspect, I'll grant you the argument, but I think inherent within everyone is both good and bad. We have polarities, all energies.
Certainly the potential for those.
Right, exactly. And then it's a matter of what do you cultivate. Like that old Native American story about the wolves, well, which wolf wins, the good one or the bad one?
The voice of love, the voice of fear.
Yeah, inside you. And, of course, grandfather says it's the one I feed. So, I think this is really big in terms of even evolution of the human species. Evolution of consciousness is an aspect of evolution that often gets overlooked. We think only in terms of the physical body evolving so that the leopard has spots and the giraffe has a long neck and so on and so forth. But our awareness is evolving, and I think since we have within us an inherent ability to do horrible things if that's what it takes to survive, and also this goodness or this godness that we aspire to, this longing in our hearts to be good, to be ethical, to want things to be fair, damn it, and just. That's inherent within us as well. So what are we going to feed? And I think overall, given that we could go either way, and we all do to one extent or another, I think there's an evolution. I think there's a growth, generally away from the tendency to favor the evil or the dark side, or I'll slit your throat before I allow you to hurt me or take my color TV or whatever. From that toward, and I think both things will always be there, but nevertheless, the balancing point, like removing the fulcrum toward an aspiration to goodness and all of the ethical and moral values that go with that.
That really is a wonderful definition of the evolution of conscience. Because right now, for most people, it's that voice that says you shouldn't. It's the voice that says, no. It's the voice that says, you know better than to do that. And wouldn't it be wonderful if, like, we were clear of that, and now the voice said, here's an opportunity, like, you could go out and do something really special here, like, oh, here's a chance you can really make a difference. That is the conscience, too, saying, I love you for what you're doing, but you could do even more, that aspiring to be more, do more, help more. That could be what the conscience evolves into. Right now, I think most of us have to deal with this thing we call guilt or regret or remorse, the voice that continues to say you shouldn't have done that, or feel guilty because that way you won't ever do it again. There's some good lessons in that. Now, some people, unfortunately, they get confused and they think a clear conscience is just a short-term memory. It's like just because you forgot about it doesn't mean it's not bothering you anymore. Because stuff bothers you even below your level of conscious awareness all the time. If you're holding on to guilt, to like feeling angry at somebody and not forgiving it, holding on to that stuff, it's not only when you think about it consciously that it hurts you, that it bothers you. It's actually bothering you, causing you stress all of the time. So the idea here is if you listen to your conscience and it brings up for you those things that you feel guilty about, that's your opportunity to clear that energy. See, when you can bring up the stuff that you still hold regret, remorse, embarrassment, shame, stuff about, the more of that you can cleanse, and it's easy to cleanse. All you have to do is face it. All you have to do is experience it, face it, breathe into it, because once you breathe into it, the brain gets, this isn't dangerous anymore, and you don't lose the memory of it. You never, ever will lose the memory of it. Hopefully, you wouldn't want to, but what you'll lose is the charge, the drain of your energy, the stress that it causes, because your brain gets, it's not dangerous. I faced it. I'm breathing deeply. I'm relaxed. I face it. It didn't hurt me at all. When I first faced it, it hurt me a lot. When I first faced it, it scared the heck out of me. But now I can remember it, but it doesn't have to affect. How do you clear that stuff that your conscience is still bothering you about? Well, experience it, face it, breathe into it, release it. If there's more, do it again, whatever it takes. Conscience is a wonderful opportunity for you to grow. We always talk about adversity being the diamond dust that, gets us all shined up. It's the easy stuff's easy. It's the hard stuff. It's when you lift the heavier weights, that you really do more. So we can use conscience in that way. But I think the most significant way to use conscience is not as a process of looking backward, but rather as a process of looking forward. And since I was probably 4 or 5 years old, I've really been driven on some ways by this phrase that I heard in my on a TV show that has affected me ever since, and it was Jiminy Cricket saying, "Let your conscience be your guide." That's so powerful.
Yeah, that was really part of the early Disney mythology, right along with When You Wish Upon a Star.
I use that one a lot, too. Especially in Maui with a zillion stars. It's even more wonderful.
And Peter Pan teaching that in order to fly, all you have to do is believe you can fly. And Dumbo had his feather, and the little engine realized it really couldn't if it just kept at it. And these are wonderful, powerful elements of our mythology, and they're found in Mother Goose, in Aesop's fables, in Grimm's fairy tales, in the folk wisdom of Confucius and Lao Tzu.
And the little old ant that needed to move that rubber tree plant that had high hopes.
Another way of talking about the evolution of consciousness, and more specifically, that part of it today we're calling the evolution of conscience, is to take a look at the difference between instinct and intuition. Because both are non-logical. I won't say they're illogical, but they're non-logical processes. This is not a matter of deductive reasoning.
Or even inductive reasoning. There's no reasoning about it.
There's no reasoning.
That doesn't mean it's unreasonable, though.
It just seems that it comes from a part of the brain that has already thought this thing through. Joseph Chilton Pearce called intuition thoughts that arrive full-blown. And a lot of creative people talk about being gobsmacked, suddenly blown away by an entire lyric to a song or a melody.
Paul McCartney got Yesterday in a Dream.
Yeah, I heard John Fogerty talk about jumping out of bed in the middle of the night and writing down an entire song. And
Keith Richards wrote dun, 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 and then he later listened to it, and it was dun, dun. He fell right back to sleep.
Well, so where does it come from? It comes from deep within us, as does instinct. Now, instinct is not nearly as creative, and when people talk about a gut feeling, most of them don't make this distinction. Well, which gut? Are you talking about the lower gut, the instinct, the herd mentality, or the higher gut, so-called, which is aspirational to the heart? and has a much higher frequency intuition. I think the difference also is that the instinct is rather fear-oriented.
Yeah, instead of being creative, it's really anti-destructive.
Yeah.
It's pro-survival by not letting anything bad happen. It's about moving away from what you fear.
So I think there's a big lesson in this about evolution, that we are moving, as I said earlier, the tipping point seems to be at hand here, where increasingly we move away from the moving away from things.
Isn't that a wonderful way of putting it? Yeah.
And more toward the moving toward things. In other words, less fear, more love. Less avoiding what you don't want, more aspiring toward what you do want.
Which takes essentially feeling safe. Because if you feel in danger, the autopilot's going to be moving away from that danger. It's feeling safe. Now, that's feeling safe, not thinking that you're safe. You could be logically, rationally having deduced that it's safe. Like I'm sitting here in this room and no invading army is going to come in and shoot me, and there's no wild animal. I'm safe, absolutely. That doesn't mean that I feel safe, just because I logically know I'm safe. Roller coasters are a wonderful example. Everybody knows. Logically, roller coasters are safe. It's designed by a team of safety engineers, the world's greatest experts on safety, are putting this thing together. But people don't feel safe on a roller. If they're not breathing, they're feeling terrified. If they're breathing, they're feeling excited. But, either way, they're not feeling safe. Just knowing something's safe doesn't even make you feel safe. So it's learning to feel safe. It's learning how to experience the experience that comes with deep rhythmic breathing, that comes with the body holding very little tension, that comes with the mind clearly moving from one crystal clear thought to another crystal clear thought, and not being confused with a whole bunch of things going on at the same time, back and forth, back and forth. It's a state, it's a zone, it's a flow, it's a powerful state where you become more sensitive to everything going on inside of you, and in this state you experience and can hear your conscience, and that voice that, as Michael was talking about, it not only tells us to be careful, to not do things, to stay away from danger, but if we listen very carefully and feel safe, that same voice will evolve into a voice that's really talking about our aspirations. It's talking about the things that we could do and become and create and gift, and the philanthropy that's within us, the helpingness that's within us. All that stuff is within our conscience purview to start to suggest to us to do once we clear the fear of the things we're afraid of.
Do you think there are people that feel, let me ask you more directly, have you ever felt that although you were in touch with your conscience, you didn't give it a lot of authority or credibility?
Oh, absolutely.
You didn't know whether to trust it or believe in it?
When I was young, that was, clearly the thing that happened. I was talking about the Vietnam War. Here was our government, and this was like John Kennedy, like my hero, and like, wow, what a great thing. The Camelot, and it was an amazing time to be alive, the 60s and the Beatles, and then, Lyndon Johnson, I was hoping would be the same, but it turned out to be a time when the government was saying, I'm going to spin this thing, and this ball is going to come up with a certain number, and if that number's your birthday, you're going to go kill people. And I was saying, I love my government. I trust my government. I pay my taxes, and I stop at red lights, and, I'm glad we have fire departments. But no, at that point, I said, just because... Stokely Carmichael. I've written Stokely Carmichael said there's a higher authority than government, and that's your conscience. I'm not sure if I'm quoting that exactly, but it was pretty close to that. And so that's where I think there was definitely a time. Very rare, actually, for me to experience that, but that was a time when cognitive dissonance to the hilt. There's one voice that's saying, it's wrong to disobey your God. You'd be a traitor to your country if you didn't go fight with it. And this other voice saying, you'd be a traitor to yourself if you went and actually killed people that didn't do anything bad to you. So that was a clear-cut case for me.
Well, they were putting people in jail. This is part of the paradox, like capital punishment. I don't want to get off on a tangent, but...
Oh, yeah, but there's a national conscience, like, you got that one. That one's a very deep core issue for people. People were applauding that at the GOP debate.
I know. The irony, though, regardless of where you come down on this, you have to grant the irony, which is we're going to prove that murder is wrong by killing you. And so state murder is okay. And the same thing with war. Well, we're going to give you a really nice uniform that the girls will love and some ribbons, some really pretty ribbons and medals. And it's hard to say this because a lot of people take offense. You get really upset and really angry. But everybody that's been in war knows what an atrocity war is. You cannot have war without atrocity, regardless of the fact that it's also true that there is incredible bravery and heroism and courage and loyalty and all these wonderful values that we see in war also. That doesn't really speak to the value of war itself. So,
I mean, if anybody actually thinks that war should be our first choice, our number one best option in any case, that no other option is as good as that one, that's sick. To me, that's a sick mind.
And no soldier will ever say that.
Right, exactly.
It was a soldier that said war is hell.
Exactly.
It wasn't a hippie. So,
and we're not disparaging the troops at all,
or the hippies.
Yeah, or the hippies, for that matter. No, what we're talking about is your own individual conscience. And I just read a book, a great story called Until Tuesday. And Tuesday was this golden retriever service dog to this guy who'd just come out of the army in Afghanistan, wounded and with terrible post-traumatic stress disorder, and could hardly get around. And he had this incredible dog but he talked about how going into this war, his family was military. He was gung-ho. Like like Saddam has got these weapons of mass destruction and we're going to go get them. And he came out of that war just so disillusioned and so upset with the government and so lied to, And he made a point of, the George Bush days are over. It's not Republicans. They're very different than George Bush. It was the George Bush thing that drove him crazy. And he's now out there talking about, what we need to do something different. We can end war, as a group conscience. We did it with slavery. I mean, it's virtually gone in the world today. We can do that with war. If enough people believe in and listen to their conscience, which aspires to a world that doesn't have it. It's got to start there. That won't end it. War won't be gone because a bunch of people think it'd be nice if it was gone. But if it doesn't start with that, it's never going to start at all.
Dr. Martin Luther King used a phrase about a revolution of values, or he may have said a revolution of ethics. But obviously, a revolution of values or ethics would not be a violent revolution. It would be an accelerated evolution and revolutionary that way. And that's what so many of us really care about, is teaching other people and persuading, influencing, educating, uplifting, inspiring other people to listen to their conscience, to develop their consciousness, to acknowledge that we've got a shadow side, as Jung called it, and it's necessary to survival. It's really what the ego is, very fear-based. That critical voice in your head. Why do you beat yourself up like that? Why are we often our own worst enemy? Well, that's the shadow side. And you need that sometimes. You really do. If you're going to be in a separated body in a world where everything seems to be other than you or it, well, you got to watch your back. You got to be on guard. So we need that shadow side. But we also have this conscience. We have this good side that we aspire to, that wants to get better. It's a longing or an urge. The psychologist Assagioli has this beautiful quote I often think about, that we're very much like a plant that turns toward the light every morning and follows the sun across the sky, reaching, growing toward the source of its life, as if it wants to know more or go home again to the beginning, to the source. It seems we have that longing, that aspirational self, to go to the source of our goodness, because we are good. And let there never again be a debate, are people basically good or bad? The answer is yes. Yes. All energies have their polarities, and each of us has a shadow side and a light side, a darkness and this brilliance, this magnificence. And some have even pointed out that as scary as the dark side can be, the magnificence, isn't it Marianne Williamson that says?
That's what people are really afraid of, is how brilliant they truly are.
It's not our inadequacy we fear, it's that we don't have any excuses, that we really are magnificent and wonderful. And that's where the word awe goes both ways.
Doesn't it? Absolute fear or absolute amazement. In either case, it's the same kind of altered state for sure. And in that state, when we're in reverence, when we're in focus, when we're in focused passion, we like to call it, that awe, wonder state, that's when we're tuned in. We can hear our conscience. It comes through loud and clear. The higher the stress levels, the more voices that are shouting at us, the less likely we are to hear that still, calm, quiet voice, that whisper voice that is the higher self, that is where conscience is. And again, we have to work through probably most of the old stuff, the stuff that our conscience is like still holding on to, the regrets, the remorse, the embarrassment, the shame stuff. Feeling guilt because we need to remember those lessons so we don't repeat them. And maybe it's been 20 years and you haven't repeated them. I mean, at some point you get to get yourself off the hook. You get to realize, okay, yeah, I did that when I was 9. I stole candy from the supermarket, but I'm not stealing candy. It's been 40 years. I haven't stolen any candy. I can let myself off the hook for that one. I don't have to wake up in the middle of the night like shivering because I'm afraid one day I'm going to steal candy. There's a whole lot of stuff in there like that conscience is holding on to because you haven't been willing to let go of. It's not holding on to you. This is a wonderful point. Michael makes this frequently. It's not holding on to you. You're holding on to it. You're holding on to those, not the memories. Of course you're holding on to the memories. That's what memories are for. You're holding on to the charge those memories contain. So to have the kind of conscience that says, aspire, look to all the great things that you can do and can create and can become, I think a big part of it is to clear up the conscience that's holding on to all those regrets, remorse, embarrassment, shames, and guilt that you have from the past.
I mentioned earlier in our program today that not every language makes a distinction between consciousness, as in being conscious, or awareness or understanding, and conscience, our topic today. The English language obviously does. Here we are making that distinction. I believe the German language does as well, but many others don't. And so I'm going to talk for just a second about what Steve and I see as two other parts of the evolution or development of consciousness. And you could say this is part of the unfolding or development of conscience. I guess it's how you look at it. But we've talked so far about the development or the unfolding, if you will, of ethics and values, a longing for fairness and justice. A couple of other areas, I think, that are definitely part of the development of conscious awareness is the ability to see a bigger picture, the gestalt, the whole enchilada. I think probably the best way to say it is the bigger picture. Concepts as well as details. It's not a trade-off, interestingly. You don't lose your ability to be deductive and rational and logical, to break things down from general to specific. You don't lose that at all. If anything, that becomes more acute as well. But what is added to it as we develop our conscious awareness mindfully with feelings of safety and relaxation is this this, again, it's the intuition, isn't it, that seems to hand you full-blown this realization of the bigger context, the bigger picture, wait a minute. And then along with that often comes a third element, which is connection, where in the past you saw only antagonism. Harmony, where in the past you had seen only discord and conflict. And these three things, the evolution of values or ethics, morality, if you will, the ability to see a bigger, more complete picture, and the tendency to see, in a relative sense anyway, connection where in the past you had only seen absolute conflict, I think all three of these are elements of the evolution of consciousness.
And as we awaken, those things will begin to appear in daily life. We'll see the start, a few people doing those kinds of things, and more will do it, and that's the way it's evolved. I mean, it's the way it's been evolving. I mean, you take a look at the conscience of people back a few hundred years ago when it was perfectly okay to own other people and perfectly okay to, like, have them fight each other to the death, and, you know, like shooting somebody or hanging somebody was perfectly acceptable if they were this color or that color. I mean, our conscience as a group, as a collective group of beings, has evolved, and we've become more refined, you know, there's still some real rough edges, like you mentioned, capital punishment, but basically we become more refined in what our group conscience and therefore our individual conscience is telling us is right for us to do. And, you know, we're dreaming of a day when it won't be all about don't do this stuff. It'll be more about, you know, do more of this stuff. But that's on the horizon, and I think it's starting to happen. And we find those people, the Martin Luther Kings and the Maya Angelou's that have wonderful things to say about that. We find them our heroes. We look up and we admire people who are clearly driven by their conscience, who are clearly doing what their values and their morals and their ethics say, even if it's fighting the river, even if it's moving against what most people are believing. Those people are the people we look up to. They are the beginnings of the tide of the evolution that's going to happen. And I think it's clear that we are evolving toward being kinder and sweeter and more awake beings. I mean, we were much more so than we were a few hundred years ago, with obvious exceptions, but as a whole, we are becoming that way. And it's because as individuals, we are becoming that way. It's because we are more individual now than we have ever been in history. We are more available to do what we want to do instead of what some authority tells us to do. More people can make their own choices and more available choices than ever before. It's a world where human beings are evolving into very independent and interdependent creatures. I mean, we don't have to follow authority all the time anymore. And as that becomes true, the moral compass inside of us becomes more significant than the social moral compass. And I think as each individual's moral compass is free to evolve, it evolves in that same aspirational way. It doesn't devolve, it evolves. And as more individuals set the trend, become the leaders, become the shoulders of the giants that we can stand on top of, the quicker this evolution that we're dreaming about can take place.
I have respect for people who can believe whatever they want to believe in terms of a philosophy or a religion. And I think most people try to integrate that with science. They don't want to be totally anti-science, because then you're stuck with the world is flat and the earth is the center of the universe and all of that. So we need to be reasonable no matter how closely we embrace religious beliefs. But having said that most people are somewhere in the middle trying to integrate creation and evolution in their own minds, I think an important difference if we look at just the polarities here, the opposites, the distinctions between the two, is that creation leaves us with an idea of a static hereafter. God created the universe in 6 days, rested on the seventh, and then Monday was just like any other day. Right.
It's like he threw the bowling ball and it just kept rolling.
Yeah, and now creation is done and everything stays the same. Well, we know that's not true. I heard an anti-evolution person on a talk show the other day say, well, I don't believe in evolution, but I believe in adaptation. And he was talking about the way a virus will mutate. And, well, that's evolution. So, you know, you're picking nits here to say, I don't believe humans evolved from lower forms of life, but I can see how that's happening now. And, you probably did in high school experiments with fruit flies, or at least studied Mendel and the peas, and we understand this. It's fixed science. Well, that means we're still evolving. That means the creation is still happening. And what I'm talking about is standing right on the verge of realizing that we could consciously accelerate that process. If not accelerate the evolution of the physical part of ourselves, certainly the evolution of consciousness and conscience. Why not say, oh my God, I'm an evolving, unfolding, ever-improving creature. I wonder if I could kick it into gear, kick in the afterburners, get it on, and really accelerate that whole process.
Well, I mean, don't you think we've already done that? Don't you think like a few thousand years ago, people thought, I have to do what I'm told. I mean, I have to follow the clan or whatever, and I'm not allowed to go. I mean, the rare exception, the rebel, But now I think consciousness has evolved, and now most people in this Western society, at least, most people think, no, I'm an individual, and I get to make my own choices, and yeah, I'll follow the norms and the mores, but I'll choose which ones I'll defy, and so I think consciousness has already evolved a great deal in the last just few hundred, certainly the last couple thousand years, tremendously, and hopefully at an accelerated pace, so that what we're talking about essentially is that the conscience can turn off its guilt mode and turn on its aspiration mode,
There's no question that that's happening. What I guess I'm talking about is how aware are we of the fact that it's happening, and can we consciously accelerate the growth of our consciousness and its conscience?
To do so, we must get out of beta into alpha. We must get out of the stress world into the place where we feel safe, because that's the only place we can hear that quiet voice, that voice that we call intuition, not instinct. Instinct is like the fear voice that says, move away from, and intuition is that love voice that says move toward. So let's move toward, and it starts with letting your brain know you're safe. And that starts by closing your eyes, because if it wasn't safe, you wouldn't let yourself do that, and taking a couple or a few really deep breaths, because when you do that, then your brain knows you must be safe, because if you weren't safe, it'd be breathing shallow, holding its breath, getting ready to run or hit. If you can breathe deeply, it knows, hey, this is what I do before I go to sleep. I must be safe now. And then with your eyes closed and breathing deep, consciously at first, and then allow it to just go unconscious, what we suggest you do is imagine yourself with a picture, or just get the sensation or feeling that you're in a very peaceful place with lots of quiet, beautiful, calm things around, no distractions, nothing to fear. Everything is clear that it's really safe here, really safe here in this peaceful place. And we're going to take a little ride in this peaceful place where you're going to let your conscience be your guide.
Think of a child, a small child, a young child, 3 or 4 years old. Now maybe you have children of your own. Maybe you know some kids. Certainly you've been exposed to the truly beautiful innocence of a child at that age. Oh, sure, I know. They can be bratty. They can hit. They can feel like they don't want to share their toys. They're very self-centered. And yet, so beautiful is their ability to love with a purity and innocence, a willingness to trust and love. It's one thing when somebody you're attracted to as an adult says, I love you. But it just melts your heart when a little kid, a little boy or a little girl climbs up onto your lap and says so innocently, I love you. Consider that their ability to love and to trust is a feeling that you can remember even now and draw upon when you listen to your intuition. To not be afraid of the intuition. It's never going to mislead you. Your thoughts about your intuition could confuse you, but again, if you breathe and relax, Let go of the thoughts and the judgments and the analysis and just listen to that still, small whisper of a voice. It's so positive. It's so encouraging and inspirational. Trust it with the innocence and purity of a child. Bring simply the feeling that you can recall now. Trust at that level to your willingness to listen to look at, to honor and respect your intuition.
One of the most powerful of the powers you've got is to know which voice is intuition and which ones are not. It's a quiet, calm, whispering voice. And it doesn't demand, it offers a choice. It's clear, it's quiet, but it knows what's right. And it's followed with a feeling of great insight. Yes, that's true. I just know it. And then you use that feeling for healing and for dealing with whatever it is that you face. It's a powerful, powerful force in either case. So, know one of the more powerful powers you've got is to know which voice is conscience and which ones are not. The ones that demand, the ones that scream and yell, it's easy to know, it's easy to tell. Those are ego voices. Be very clear. Those are driven not by love, those are driven by fear. Your conscience comes through crystal clear when your mind is quiet and you are here, feeling safe, feeling free. Your conscience has the ability to make itself known, to let you know clear. It's a voice when you're quiet that's quite easy to hear. So remember, very simply, bring yourself back here, to this place, to this space where you're safe, free of fear. And abracadabra, your conscience will appear.
Reflect for a moment upon the number of times in your life where in retrospect you realized that you'd talked yourself out of doing the right thing. And may even have heard yourself saying to yourself, "Oh, darn it, I knew I should have done this, or I knew I should have avoided that, or I knew I should have made this choice, but I talked myself out of it."
Against my better judgment.
Trust your intuition. It's your conscience. Remember that little cricket in Disney? Let your conscience be your guide. It's a part of you. It's the higher self, the better essential truth of who you are that lives within you, often in the silence, behind the din of thoughts competing for your attention. But when you quiet those thoughts and calm the emotional nature, there's a feeling that persists, that stands above it all. It's subtle, it's quiet, but it's truth with a capital T, and it's love, and it's peace, and it's kindness, and it's humility, and it's generosity, and it's patience, and it's you, and it's coming forward. If we would just release our fears a little more each day. and let the best of us, the goodness in us, come forward, caring about what's fair, what's right, what's just in the world.
So if in your life your conscience has built a whole lot of shame and regret and guilt, then know that you can allow that fear to clear. Just being here and experience it. Breathe and release, and you'll find the peace. Leave the charge behind. Keep the memory in mind. Leave the charge behind. And then your conscience is free to dream about what you could become, to aspire to greater goodness. And let the voices of guilt become numb. No need any longer for those voices to get any stronger. In fact, now's the time to release. Face the fear, face the guilt, face the shame, and find the peace. And let your conscience cease to deal with the past so it can be free to aspire to greatness at last.
Bring these feelings with you. The peace and the safety, the ability to hear, to see, and to trust your conscience as you develop your consciousness, and every day in every way become better and better and better, aspiring to your goodness, to your love and light, to your magnificence and majesty. Now, ego often rushes in and says, I'll take credit, majesty, magnificence, I can do that. But it's not the I or the ego that grows as you listen to your conscience. It's the higher self, the truth of who you are, the goodness within. Bring that with you effortlessly into the waking state as we move toward wide awake, inhaling. Hold as you peak, and as you exhale slowly, feel the letting go, and open your eyes now. Wide awake, alert, rested and refreshed, feeling fine, better than before.
You know, there was a wonderful line I remember, I think it was Mencken, who said, the way to be happy is to have a clear conscience or none at all. You know, I think, you know, that describes what sociopaths and psychopaths and people who just really don't have any voice inside that says, nope, killing people is a bad idea. You know, there are rare exceptional human beings like that. I use the word exceptional in a special way there, but you know, they are extremely rare compared to the vast majority of us who do have a real conscience that says war is bad and hurting people is bad. And, you know, the safer we feel, the more we're going to start listening to that voice. And I think the evolution of conscience that we're talking about comes through as we become more aware that we have choices, that we're not under anybody's thumb. We're individual, unique human beings with choices. And when we realize that freedom, we feel safer. Then we can hear that voice that we call conscience.
Thanks for being with us this week. Hope you'll follow us next week. Listen for the 52 episodes per year that we bring you of this Finding Yourself in Paradise Personal Empowerment Program. Tell your friends about it. Forward the newsletter. Use the Send One to a Friend gadget at focusedpassion.com. And you can forward any one of these programs to somebody you know who would really enjoy hearing what you just listened to. Why don't you do that now? focusedpassion.com. Talk to you next week. As always, be gentle, love life, and take care of each other. For Steve Snyder, this is Michael Benner. Aloha from Maui.